There are moments in life when the ground disappears beneath your feet. One day everything seems stable, the job, the relationships, the plans, and the next, you find yourself staring at the rubble of what used to be your life. He knew that feeling all too well. It wasn't just the loss itself, it was the silence that followed, the kind of silence that makes you question if you'll ever stand tall again. People told him, it's just a phase, as if pain were something that politely packs its bags and leaves when you ask. But the truth was different. Mornings felt heavier, even simple decisions, getting dressed, making coffee, felt like dragging a mountain uphill. He didn't tell anyone how much he was struggling. Pride kept him quiet, fear kept him still. It was on one of those nights, staring at the ceiling in the dark, that he stumbled across the words of an ancient philosopher. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire, yet understood the weight of loss and hardship. Those words didn't solve his problems instantly, but they lit a small candle in the darkness. The candle whispered something different. What if the problem isn't that life has knocked you down, but that you're afraid to get back up? What if falling was part of the design, a necessary step in becoming who you were meant to be? That night, he decided he would try again. Not to rebuild everything at once, but to reclaim one small piece of himself each day. If you've ever felt broken, if you've ever thought you were too tired to try again, this journey is for you. Because standing again is not about denying the pain, it's about learning to live with it, to carry it without letting it crush you. And if this message reaches you in one of your darkest hours, know this, you are not alone in the fight. Before we go deeper, I want to invite you, not just as a listener but as a fellow traveler, to subscribe to this channel. Here, we explore the timeless wisdom of the Stoics, turning it into practical tools for modern life. If this story speaks to you, you'll want to stay for the lessons ahead. The Stoics believe that every blow life delivers is a teacher in disguise. But like any teacher, life doesn't hand out the answers. It forces you to wrestle with the question until you understand it in your bones. That's where he found himself, not in a classroom, but in the silent arena of his own mind, facing the hardest opponent he'd ever met, himself. He didn't rise the next morning with the confidence of a conqueror. There was no cinematic moment of instant transformation. What happened instead was smaller and far more powerful. He made his bed. It might sound ridiculous, making the bed as an act of defiance against despair. But for him, that simple act was the first time in weeks he had chosen order over chaos. The Stoics taught that we cannot always command the grand events of life, but we can command ourselves. In that moment, the bed was the empire and he was its ruler. Later that day, when the familiar heaviness crept back, he reached for another principle. Focus only on what is within your control. Bills were piling up. Messages from friends went unanswered. The temptation was to spiral into what if and why me. But instead he asked, what is the next smallest thing I can do today that moves me forward? Sometimes the answer was as small as making a single phone call, writing down a plan, or even just stepping outside for 5 minutes of air. And slowly, the days began to stack. Not with grand victories, but with tiny deliberate wins. Wins that no one could take from him because they didn't depend on luck, wealth, or the approval of others. The Stoics called this self-mastery, the art of building an unshakable foundation inside yourself so that no storm can sweep you away entirely. In those early steps, there was still pain. There was still uncertainty, but there was also something new, a sense of direction. He began to understand that life wasn't asking him to erase his wounds, only to walk with them, and each time he chose action over paralysis, he felt a little less like a victim and a little more like a participant in his own story. If you're listening to this, maybe you're carrying something heavy too. Maybe you've been waiting for motivation to magically appear before you take that first step. But the truth is, action often comes before motivation. Even the smallest action taken today can become the cornerstone of the life you're rebuilding. The Stoic way is not about pretending life is easy. It's about refusing to surrender the one thing you will always control, how you respond. And as he kept moving, one day at a time, he realized that life's blows had not destroyed him. They had carved him into someone stronger. It came without warning. A letter in the mail, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. His financial situation, fragile at best, was about to get worse. Debt collectors don't care about your healing process. Deadlines don't pause because you've been broken. And in that moment, he felt the old wave of panic rising, the same suffocating current that had pulled him under before. But this time, something was different. Instead of letting the panic run unchecked, he stopped. Literally. He stopped moving, stopped pacing, stopped the storm of what if in his head. He took a deep breath and remembered another Stoic teaching. If it's endurable, then endure it, stop complaining. It wasn't cold indifference. It was a reminder that fear magnifies pain and clarity shrinks it. The problem was real, but so was his ability to respond. He sat at the table, the letter in front of him, and began to write. Not a desperate plea, not a rant about unfairness, but a plan. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't solve everything overnight. But it was something. One phone call to make tomorrow, one small adjustment to his spending, one conversation he'd been avoiding that could lead to help. He knew the path forward wasn't guaranteed, but in writing that plan, he had already reclaimed control. This is what the Stoics meant when they said we should meet obstacles as training grounds, not as verdicts on our worth. Marcus Aurelius had faced wars, plagues, betrayal, and he still found a way to act with calm purpose. Why not him? Why not now? As the hours passed, the fear didn't vanish, but it lost its grip. Action, even the smallest kind, had pushed back the shadows. He began to realize that every challenge was a chance to practice, to strengthen the muscle of resilience. And resilience, unlike luck, could not be taken away. To anyone listening who's facing their own letter, their own phone call, their own unexpected blow, know this. The test you're facing now is not the end of your story. It's a chapter, one that can either define you or refine you. The choice, as the Stoics knew, is yours. Weeks turned into months, and though his circumstances hadn't magically transformed, something inside him had. The man who once avoided calls now picked them up. The man who once saw each day as an enemy now treated it as a sparring partner, challenging but valuable. He wasn't invincible. There were still nights when doubt crept in like a cold wind under the door. Want to change your life forever? Then subscribe to the channel here and join this community of winners who never give up. But those nights no longer dictated the direction of his life. People around him began to notice. A friend who had been quietly struggling with his own battles asked one afternoon, "How are you holding it together?" He didn't have a polished answer. Instead, he told the truth. "I stopped trying to control everything outside me. I just focus on the next thing I can actually do." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't meant to inspire. But in that raw honesty, his friend saw a way forward for himself too. This was the hidden gift the Stoics had been talking about all along. That by mastering your own response to hardship, you inevitably become a lighthouse for others. Not by preaching, not by pretending to have all the answers, but simply by living in a way that shows it's possible to endure without losing your dignity. He thought often of Epictetus, a man born into slavery, crippled by injury, yet unbroken in spirit. Epictetus taught that while fate controls the cards you're dealt, you always choose how to play them. That lesson had become his quiet mantra. Each time life tested him, he repeated it. "I choose my move." And with each choice, his confidence returned. Not the fragile kind built on easy days, but the deep-rooted confidence born from surviving the hard ones. He was no longer the man who measured his worth by his comfort or his success. He was the man who could look loss in the eye and keep walking. If you've been listening and thinking you can't take another step, let this be your proof that you can. You don't need to leap, just step. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. Not because of algorithms or numbers, but because here we walk this road together, learning from the wisdom of those who have walked it before us. It happened on an ordinary morning. No special occasion, no dramatic shift in fortune. Just sunlight spilling across the kitchen table and the sound of a kettle boiling. He realized almost without noticing that he was calm, not numb, not distracted. Calm. For months, every quiet moment had been filled with noise, worry, regret, fear. But now, there was space. Space to breathe. Space to think. With that space came a question he hadn't dared ask before. What do I want my life to stand for now? It was a dangerous question because it demanded honesty. He could no longer hide behind the excuse of being in survival mode. Survival had been necessary, yes, but it wasn't the destination. And the Stoics had never taught survival for its own sake. They taught virtue, courage, wisdom, justice, and self-discipline as the pillars of a meaningful life. So he made a list, not of things to acquire or goals to impress others, but of ways to live those virtues daily. Courage meant saying yes to opportunities, even if fear lingered. Wisdom meant learning something new every week. Justice meant showing up for others when he could. And self-discipline, that one he knew well now, it meant doing what needed to be done, whether he felt like it or not. It wasn't glamorous. There were no instant rewards. But the more he lived by that list, the more he realized the truth. Purpose isn't something you stumble upon by luck. Purpose is built brick by brick, choice by choice, in the way you meet each day. And here's the thing. Once he started living with purpose, the world responded. Opportunities appeared, not because fate had suddenly favored him, but because people are drawn to those who carry themselves with direction. A former colleague reached out with a small project. A neighbor asked for his help organizing a local charity event. None of these were life-changing on their own, but together, they began to form a new foundation. This was the Stoic way in action. Not waiting for life to hand you meaning, but creating meaning where you stand, even if that ground was once the site of your greatest fall. It was raining the day he realized he was no longer the same man who had once been crushed by life's weight. Not the soft kind of rain that whispers on the window, but a sharp, relentless downpour. He stood at a bus stop, clothes soaked, holding a folder with papers that represented weeks of work. A gust of wind caught them, scattering pages into the street. Months ago, this would have broken him. He would have cursed, chased each sheet with panic, and replayed the loss in his mind for days. But not now. He didn't run into traffic. He didn't shout at the sky. He simply watched the pages dance away in the wind, then smiled. A real, unforced smile. They're gone, he thought. That's life. He still had his mind, his hands, his will. And with those, he could recreate anything. The papers were just paper. He was something far more durable. That moment, as small as it seemed, was the clearest proof yet. The storms hadn't broken him. They had built him. Every setback, every sleepless night, every fear he had faced had forged an inner core that could not be touched by mere circumstance. This was what the Stoics meant when they spoke of amor fati, to not just accept fate, but to love it, knowing that each twist and turn shapes you into the person you are meant to be. Standing in the rain, he felt gratitude for the hardships he once despised. Without them, he would still be the man who believed his strength depended on comfort. Without them, he would still fear the next fall. Now he understood that falling and rising were not opposite ends of life. They were the rhythm of it. And as the bus arrived, he stepped on with nothing but a soaked jacket and a quiet resolve. No possessions in his hands, but everything he needed within. That was the Stoic way, to carry your true wealth where no storm, no thief, no loss could reach. In the end, the world didn't change for him. Not in the way most people hope. The bills didn't vanish. The challenges didn't stop arriving at his door. The rain still fell, sometimes harder than before, but something far greater had shifted. He no longer feared it. Life's blows had once left him scattered, unsure if he could ever stand again. Now he understood the truth that only the tested discover. That strength is not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it. Every hardship had been a silent teacher, shaping him into someone who could walk through the storm with steady steps. He learned to see life not as a series of unfair interruptions, but as a forge. Each difficulty, each loss, each unexpected turn was fire and hammer, shaping the steel within. And the more he embraced this, the freer he became. Because a person who no longer fears the fall is the one who truly learns how to stand. To anyone still on the ground, wondering if they have the will to rise, hear this. Your story is not over. You are not defined by this chapter, and you are not powerless. Take one step today, however small, and let it be proof that you still own your life. The Stoics knew that the path to resilience is not built in comfort, but in the quiet decision to keep moving, even when the weight feels unbearable. And so, as he looked back on the road behind him, he didn't wish for an easier path. He only felt gratitude for the strength he had earned along the way. For the first time, he saw himself not as a victim of fate, but as its willing student. If this journey has spoken to you, if you've seen even a reflection of your own struggle in these words, then join us here. Subscribe to this channel, not for numbers, not for vanity, but because here we walk together through the lessons that make us unbreakable. Ancient wisdom, modern trials, shared strength. We rise, we fall, we rise again. And that is the Stoic way to stand when life knocks you flat.